It kicked off on one of those blistering summer afternoons where the sun feels like it's melting everything in sight, and the air itself turns heavy. I was stretched out in my backyard, sipping on a frosty drink, soaking up the calm beside my brand-new pool. This wasn't just a pool. It was my private retreat, my reward after months of hard work. For me, it was more than water and tiles. It was peace. But as fate would have it, that peace was about to turn into the spark for a full-blown neighborhood showdown. Every community has one person, the neighbor who thinks they're the sheriff of the street. Mine happened to be our notorious HOA Karen, a woman with a clipboard and an ego big enough to fill the entire subdivision. Everyone already knew her reputation, nitpicking, gossiping, and enforcing rules with all the subtlety of a drill sergeant. Still, I underestimated how far she would go to twist those rules into her own personal weapon. It started small. Karen had been invited to a barbecue down the block, but instead of mingling there, she wandered straight into my yard. No hello, no smile, just a smug expression and that dreaded clipboard clutched in her hands. She scanned my pool like a detective at a crime scene. Then, in that syrupy, fake nice voice of hers, she said, "You realize your pool isn't supposed to be used for gatherings, right?" HOA rules are crystal clear on that. I let out a nervous laugh, thinking she was joking. But she wasn't. She was dead serious. In fact, she demanded I end the pool party right then and there. My guests looked around awkwardly, unsure if they should laugh or take her seriously. My phone buzzed with texts from neighbors warning me to keep my cool, but I was already boiling inside. Karen, of course, wasn't done. Not even close. Just minutes later, while my friends tried to brush off the tension, she pulled out the big guns, her phone. I heard her crisp voice float across the yard. "Yes, officer, there's an issue here." In seconds, she was spinning a story that made my small gathering sound like an illegal festival threatening the entire neighborhood. I thought she was bluffing until I saw flashing red and blue lights washing across my fence. My heart dropped. The cops showed up and walked in carefully, scanning the backyard as if preparing for a raid. I stepped forward, hands open, doing my best to look calm. I explained. No blaring music, no damage, no chaos, just a handful of neighbors enjoying a hot day. But Karen, she had already rehearsed her script. She gestured dramatically at the pool, waving her arms like she was describing some disaster. In her version, we were practically hosting a dangerous rave. The officers took notes politely, nodding along, even though nothing they saw matched her story. They weren't there to arrest anyone or hand out tickets, but the tension was suffocating. My heart thudded in my chest as I realized Karen had turned bureaucracy into her personal weapon. And the worst part? Some neighbors were already peeking out their blinds, whispering like they were watching a scandal unfold. I stood my ground, pointing out the rules I had checked and double-checked before installing my pool. Still, Karen clung to her authority as if her clipboard gave her the power of law itself. Her smug confidence was enough to make my blood boil. By the time the officers finally left, the day was ruined. My guests shuffled out quietly, and Karen strutted away with a victorious smirk plastered on her face. But I knew it wasn't over. This was just the opening move in a battle she had been itching to start. What began as a silly squabble over a pool had already snowballed into official complaints, HOA meetings, and, soon enough, legal papers delivered to my door. It's funny how something as small as a backyard pool can become a battleground when the wrong person has too much power. At that point, I had no idea the fight was about to drag us both into a courtroom. And when that day came, the story would twist in ways no one, least of all Karen, ever saw coming. I thought once the cops left, the nightmare was behind me. But it was only the beginning. I had been wrong to think Karen was finished after dialing the police. That had just been her opening move. Days later, an official-looking envelope landed in my mailbox. Inside was a formal complaint, stamped and worded like I had committed some grand offense. According to Karen, my backyard pool broke several HOA rules, including unauthorized gatherings and property used outside approved purposes. I stared at the letter in disbelief. To her, me enjoying a swim in my own backyard was now practically a crime. I called the HOA board immediately, hoping someone on it would apply some common sense. Surely they would recognize the complaint for what it was, petty, groundless, and ridiculous. But instead of backing me, the board tiptoed around the issue, hiding behind their rulebook. It was as though Karen's complaint carried more weight than actual logic. I felt like I was stuck in a bureaucratic maze, each turn ending in another wall of frustration. Meanwhile, word spread. Neighbors began whispering in driveways. A few were supportive, shaking their heads at Karen's antics and offering encouragement. Others grew nosy, sneaking peeks into my yard like it had turned into some kind of restricted site. My sanctuary, my pool, was no longer just mine. It had become the centerpiece of community drama. That's when I decided to start documenting everything. Photos of the pool, notes from conversations, copies of HOA interactions. If this escalated, I wanted to be ready. When the next HOA meeting came around, I walked in braced for tension. But I was still unprepared for the circus that unfolded. Karen stood before the board like a seasoned prosecutor, dramatizing every detail. She turned a casual summer BBQ into a wild tale of neighborhood chaos, complete with exaggerated hazards and disruptions. When it was my turn, I calmly pointed out every factual error, showing that nothing I did broke a single rule. But Karen's theatrics worked on some of the board, and soon the room devolved into arguments over power, rules, and where boundaries truly lay. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about a pool. It wasn't even about a BBQ. This was about power. Karen wanted control. She wanted to make an example out of me, to show the neighborhood that no one could enjoy their own property unless she approved. I had two options: give in and let her dictate my backyard, or fight back. I chose to fight. The weeks that followed were filled with letters, formal responses, and tense phone calls. Each exchange only fueled the fire. Karen didn't stop, and the HOA seemed powerless or unwilling to rein her in. My friends offered advice, but no one had ever faced off with a neighbor so relentless. Then came the breaking point. A notice arrived. Karen had filed a legal claim. She wanted the court to decide if I could keep using my backyard the way I always had. It sounded absurd, but suddenly I was preparing for court over a pool and a cookout. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about water and sunshine anymore. It was about rights, patience, and the law itself. The day of the hearing arrived. My stomach was in knots as I walked into the courthouse. The air smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, heavy with tension. There sat Karen, gripping a thick stack of papers like a sword and shield. Her face mixed smug triumph with self-righteous indignation. I reminded myself this wasn't about insults. This was about defending my ground. Karen went first. She painted my pool as a hazard to the community, my BBQ as a public nuisance. Every word she spoke was theatrical, dripping with exaggeration, yet riddled with holes. The judge, calm and measured, raised an eyebrow now and then at her dramatic flair. That was when I knew. Karen's confidence was strong, but her evidence was paper-thin. When my turn came, I kept my voice steady. I presented photos of my yard, showed the modest guest list, and handed over HOA documents proving I hadn't violated a single rule. I kept my focus on facts, not emotions, letting logic carry more weight than anger ever could. The judge began asking sharp, pointed questions, cutting straight through Karen's dramatics. Under that scrutiny, her claims unraveled. The tension shifted. Even the HOA members in the room looked uneasy, as though realizing how far she had pushed this vendetta. And then, in what felt like both an eternity and an instant, the verdict came down. The judge dismissed Karen's complaint, declaring my pool and my BBQ perfectly within my rights. She was even cautioned against filing frivolous claims again. The room exhaled in a mix of relief and stifled amusement. I had defended my backyard. But more than that, I had exposed just how easily one person's obsession with control could weaponize rules against innocent neighbors. Walking out of court, relief washed over me. My pool was mine again, my backyard free of her shadow. Neighbors congratulated me, some laughing at the sheer absurdity of it all. Karen stormed off, furious, but for now her grip on the neighborhood had slipped. Can you believe how insane this backyard battle became? If you think HOA Karen went way too far, smash that like button, leave a comment with what you would have done in my shoes, and don't forget to subscribe for the next wild neighborhood showdown. Because trust me, You won't want to miss what happens next.